Module 3 is all about Markdown and MDX, and we're going to start with Markdown. Now you can either grab the earlier commit on Lesson 19 branch and download that, or I've just included it as a zip in the lesson description here on Lesson 19. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and get started, and you should have a project like this once you get it up and running in your code editor. Just go ahead and npm install any dependencies, and then you can open up and run npm run dev like I've done right here. Okay, so with that said, we've got everything set and ready to go to start by talking about Markdown. Now, the first thing we're going to do is talk about importing components that are Markdown components and rendering them within Astro files. So in order to do that, we need a component. So let me come inside here. We'll create a components directory. And inside here, let's just say something like, I don't know, we'll call it promo banner. I think that was the example actually that's in the documentation. Now, all I have to do over here is do some Markdown, right? So I can do either some front matter up here, or I could just do something like, I don't know, title for banner. And I've got an app here where I can just insert, maybe 2 sentences of lorem ipsum. There we go. Okay, so now we've got a promo banner. Let's get this into our pages directory. So right over here, the way we can import this is there's a content rendering engine that comes along with these imported Markdown files. So I can just say import, we'll say content, and then I can rename it if I want to. So like we could call it as promo banner or whatever I want to from, and then here it's just a relative path up to the components and to the promo banner. Now what I can do is come down this way and just render it like any other component. Now, if I didn't rename it, I'd have to call it content, but since you might have multiples of these, I could just now say promo banner like that, and it will render the rendered HTML directly here. And you can see that that's exactly what it's doing. So you can actually just have Markdown components and just use them as you need to. Now, just note that I'm rendering this within an Astro file because that's where you actually get all this syntax here where you can import an Astro component factory. That's what this content is. It's the rendered HTML from your Markdown or MDX components. Now, you could also render external Markdown. So let's say you have some kind of import of some Markdown from and then someplace, all right, wherever that happens to be. All you need to do is install a package that can convert Markdown to HTML. Take that rendered HTML and then you put it inside here. So let's say we had some rendered HTML that we had gotten from here. So let's rename all this. We'll just say like rendered HTML equals, and then whatever this happens to be. So like H1, hi, and then H1 like that. We've seen this before actually, right? Where you can come inside here and what I can do is just do a fragment. And then how do you get this like rendered HTML to actually show on the page? We'll use the set HTML directive. And I would just pass it my rendered HTML like this, and then I would close off the fragment, and then this should show up right here, right? So this is the same thing you do for external Markdown. You obviously would just have to import the Markdown and then convert it to HTML using some library. There's lots of them out there, and by the time you watch this, there may be a new favorite choice. So it doesn't really matter, and I don't think a lot of people are going to do this, but I do want to let you know that this is basically the same thing you're going to do with rendered HTML from some external source. It's just that Astro gives you this as an Astro component. All right, so that's first of all how to take components or even external Markdown and render in your page. Next, I want to have actual routes that are Markdown routes. So let's go ahead and open the sidebar. You might remember from the opening lessons, we talked about routes are automatically set in this pages directory. Now that's the same for Markdown and MDX files as well. So I could come inside here and let's just have something like blog. And then I'll have inside this blog folder, let's have, first of all, post1.md. So let me paste in some Markdown, and you see we've got some Markdown front matter up here. We've got some headers. We've got some code like snippets here, lists, and then a code block down here as well. So with that said, all I have to do is come over here to /blog and then post-1, and this is all rendered out for me. Now you'll notice it doesn't pick up my styling. We're going to talk about that in a second. But to note that any Markdown file within the pages directory will automatically render as a route. Now, just like before, you could come in here and put an underscore in front of it, and now it will no longer render, but just to note that you can actually just render them directly in here if you prefer. Now, obviously, this limits you a little bit if it's just Markdown, because basically it's the content here, and then whatever layout wrapper, which I'll show you in a second, and that's pretty much it. You also don't get a lot of the type safety that you get with content collections, which is something we'll talk about later. So how do we actually get this inside of a layout? Well, what I'm going to do is create another layout. So over here, we've got this base layout, and we've done this before, but you can see that we have a wrapper essentially with a slot right inside here. And when I come to this index page, I've got this base layout here. I'm wrapping everything in that, and then this is just the rendered content. So we've seen that before. Now what I want to do for these blog components is actually have another wrapper that also uses this base layout component. So let's come inside here. I'll call this blog layout.astro. Now here, what I actually want to do is grab my base layout. So I'm actually going to import the previous layout right here, and then I'm going to add the slot right inside here. So by doing it like this, I'm taking this slot right here, and I'm basically adding it inside of this slot. So it's like a wrapper inside of a wrapper. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way is because I'm only going to use this for Markdown files, and I get some extra things when it comes to Markdown. So if I set this as the layout for a Markdown file, I will get something called the front matter. Actually, let's just go ahead and first of all console.log the astro.props. All right, but I'll show you what I get. I get front matter. I also get a URL property and a couple other things as well. Now, how do I actually get my blog post to use this? Well, I can give it a special property up here called layout. And then I just have to provide a relative path. Now, you don't get autocomplete here. I'm not totally sure why, but you don't. All right, so layouts, and then we'll go blog layout.astro, and then we'll just see if we actually get what we expect. Oh, there we go. All right, so that was the right path. Now, I console logged that, and because it was server side, I should see it down here, right? And that's what I see. So you get a bunch of things here. You get the file name itself. This is where it happens to be on my system. You get the URL. So we can see that in the routing structure, it's in a blog folder, and then under post 1. You get the content, which as you can see looks a lot like this front matter down this way. You also get access to all of the headings, so automatically your headings are slugified. We'll talk about that if I remember. And then for Markdown, you actually get raw content and compiled content. So this is only Markdown related, but basically you can actually get the raw Markdown if you need it for some reason. All right, so with that said, what we want to do is grab this front matter object, and then we can pick off things like the title from it. All right, so let's go ahead and come in here and then come back to my blog layout. And this blog layout right here receives a couple things. In fact, if I come up here, let's see, it grabs the title. So the title is being passed, and I can actually use that to basically pass it here as well. So all I have to do is come over here, and I can say the title is equal to, here we're just going to grab the front matter dot title. Now, to actually get the front matter, I need to come over here for these astro.props as well and say const front matter. So we're going to destructure this from the astro props from the astro.props. All right, so all we're doing is picking off this right here from the astro props and then grabbing the property of title. I need to remove this so it actually works, and there we go. So now the title is Hello World because that's what the title is over here. If I change this to Hello World 1, you see that that changes there as well. So the title is actually being used by the blog layout wrapper, and it's passing that along to the base layout, which is wrapping everything, which includes the head for the actual site right here. And so that's why it's actually coming down in this way. Hopefully that makes sense what we're doing. Okay, so with that said, you can have layouts just like this and wrap Markdown content. You see I get nice syntax highlighting automatically by default. All of these links and all this stuff is working because of the CSS we set up, which, by the way, if you didn't grab that, this won't look like this for you. But let's come inside of here, and you can see that I'm actually using something called Open Props, which does a lot of these resets for us. But the syntax highlighting actually comes from the plugin that's used by default in Astro, which we'll look at in a little bit. Now, if I come over this way and we inspect this right here, you'll notice that it's actually given this an ID of hi there, and it's done that, again, just by default, and Astro uses, I forget exactly what it's called. Let's look for headings, all right? Heading ID right here, you can see that it uses these headings, and it uses it from GitHub Slugger. That's the library. So it's going to slugify all your headings by default, so you get access to those. You can actually loop through them and do a bunch of stuff if you'd like to as well. I'll leave you to the documentation to check that out if you'd like to, but essentially it does a lot of nice things with your Markdown by default, kind of out of the box. Now, we've yet to really talk about rendering properly. All right, so how do you actually render pages or lists of pages? So we're going to keep it very simple now because that will be a future module. But in the next lesson, what I want to do is show you how you can grab any of these posts, so post 1, post 2, however many posts you have, and just list through them on a page or import them onto a page. So we'll do that in the next lesson. In the last lesson, we set up Markdown and actually rendered in a couple different ways. You might remember on the home page, we imported a component. We actually used like a kind of a fake external Markdown as well that we converted fakely to HTML and then dumped into the DOM. And then we also set up this blog route. Well, we didn't do that. That's what we're going to do this time. But blog post 1 like this, where you can actually render these using a layout wrapper around our Markdown. Now, in this video, what I want to do is actually render right here. All right, so this blog page right here. So first of all, what we need to do is have some kind of index. So I'm going to do index.astro, and maybe just to speed this up a touch, I should be able to come inside here and grab this and drop this in here. Now I'll have to change the import because we got to go up one extra level, but then it should work the exact same, where now this should look the same. Let's get rid of all this. We don't need this. All right, just like this, we'll call this like a blog page. Okay, so we've got all these here. Now, the question is, how can we get our Markdown routes in here as like imports? Well, what we can do is I'm going to jump over here to the documentation. We can actually import these in a couple of different ways. Let me scroll back up, this importing Markdown right here. So you can import single files or multiple files. So what I'm going to do is just grab all of this right here, and we'll have to change this around a bit. But if I come inside here, you can see that I can import anything and then name it whatever I want from a relative path. So in this case, this isn't quite right, is it? This would just be like this, post 1 like that, post 1 to Markdown, and this will be now called my post. Let's get rid of this right now as well. and we'll take my post right here. Now, if I come down here, let's console.log my post just to see what we're getting, and I'll come back over this way. Now, since this is in the front matter, that means it's down here in the server logs. Now you can see we get all those things we talked about earlier. You get the front matter, you get the raw content and compiled content since it's actually Markdown. You actually get the content Astro component that will render that for you as well. You get the headings if you want, which we haven't really looked at yet. And then you get other things like the URL. Okay, so all that to say, we can actually render these things by grabbing each of those properties and kind of getting what we need. So if I come down here, what I can do is just grab the individual properties I need from my post to loop through these. So let's have a UL. And this first LI here, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my post. Dot, and notice I get autocomplete for all this. I want my front matter, and on here I had something called a title. So if I save that there, you see I get my title coming in, hello world. Now the cool thing is I can actually also render a route to this as well, right? So if I come in here, let's have a link, and we'll dump all this back in here. But now inside this link right here, I can just grab my post.url. Now what that means is I can come over here and click, and this will take me to my post one, right? And then back here. So this is one way you could loop through stuff for a single file. Now, obviously, you might also want to do this for multiple files. So we don't have to go up. Once again, we can just come right inside here. We're going to use this glob pattern, and this is basically a wrapper around something Vite gives you, and that's what Astro uses under the hood. And you can see what I'm doing is saying, give me everything in this relative directory that is an MD file, and this will be all of my posts. Now, right now, I only have one, so maybe we should add an extra post. Let's call this post 2, and then we'll say like post 2 title or something. Post 2 title, and let's do one more. All right, we've got post 1, post 2, and post 3. Let's close those down, close down the sidebar. And now we should be getting all of these as an array inside of this post. And notice it's typed it here as a Markdown instance, so it knows what these things are. Now I should be able to come down this way then and use our templating syntax that we've already been learning, right? So we can take my posts.map and take each post, and we're just going to render out or return here an actual like li tag. So maybe I can grab it like this. And for each post, just like this, instead of saying my post, I can just change this with Command D, grab both of those, and this will be whatever the post is .url, whatever the post is .frontmatter.title, right? So if I save that there, now we get all of those. Hello world, once again, and then post 2, post 3. So we're just mapping over each of these and outputting this little bit of JSX style syntax here, where I've got an li with an anchor link inside of it. Once again, this should link to all of these as well. So there's post 3, come over here, post 2, etc., etc. Now, if you think about all these, they're all the same, but maybe I want to have some kind of like back button up here. Where would I put that if I were to do that? Well, remember, they are all using the layout, right? So this blog layout right here. So we could actually do it right here, maybe above this slide if we wanted to. So if I always want to make this go back to the blog page, all I'd have to do is say blog like this and say back to blog or something like that. Now, all of these will include this back to blog link, and I can just come in here and all of them will include that, right? Because this is where the wrapper is. So the advantage of setting up all these Markdown routes is it's really easy to get up and started. There's not a lot of boilerplate at all. You basically just glob through the files and then output them on the page. Now, there are several disadvantages. One of them is accuracy and making sure that all your front matter and all that matches what you want, which is where content collections comes in handy, and that's what we'll talk about in a future module. But the other kind of disadvantage is, aside from the content here, all the rest of the stuff has to be done in this wrapper component. And so you have to kind of abstract out where things are being rendered or where they're being added to the page and make sure that you just add those in the right spot. So that's what we've done right here. I do want to talk about just a couple of other things that we're not going to walk through here, but I want to let you know that they exist. So if I come down this way, all right, here's what I want to show you, these Markdown plugins. Now, you can actually install a bunch of plugins if you want to like change how it's rendered or add extra things to it. So for instance, if you want a table of contents, there's a plugin for that, and you can use that and apply it to your Astro config. If you want to grab the headings and do something with those, you can actually do that as well using a Markdown Remark plugin. I also mentioned that by default, all of these code blocks have a styling to them as well. Let's see if I can find this down this way. That styling comes from this syntax highlighting right here. Now you can customize it if you'd like to and add extra things or even change the actual rendering engine if you want. Change the theme, for instance, you can do that as well. So anyhow, there's a lot of things you can do with these plugins for Markdown if you want to kind of change how things are rendered. So I just wanted to mention that here. You can even add your own theme or your own custom syntax highlighting as well. You can set up Prism, which is a different kind of Markdown renderer for code blocks. So lots of different options when it comes to how to render Markdown, but I don't think we need to walk through all of those. Just wanted to let you know that they're available if you need them. Okay, in the next lesson, we're going to talk about using MDX. Now, MDX is Markdown, where you can also actually embed custom components and things like that directly in it. So that's what we're going to do in the next lesson. This module so far, we've looked primarily at Markdown, but I also said it was about MDX. Now, MDX allows you to do more like custom stuff inside of Markdown. You can actually import components and use them inside of a Markdown file, well, an MDX file. And so it gives you some extra superpowers. To install MDX, this kind of official plugin, you could just do MPX Astro add MDX. Now what this will do is walk you through the entire setup. I'm going to close the sidebar and open this up just so we can see this. It'll actually ask you if it can install the package. I'll say yes. And then it will update my Astro config, and I'll say yes to that as well. And then npm run dev, let's get this back up and running, and I'll close that down. So over this way, now we can basically use MDX files as we'd like to. So the first thing I'm going to do is open the sidebar, and we're just going to take this post one right here, and we're going to convert it to MDX. So as soon as we've done that, you'll notice it looks very similar. In fact, you've got front matter up here, and all this Markdown should continue to work. The only difference here is we actually need to import this a little bit differently. So if I come over here, now what I'm going to do is grab my MDX right here and import that. So if I come back over here, you'll notice that everything should look the same. We've got this hello world, post 2 and post 3. And then my post down here, this is that MDX. Down here, we're now looping over all of our Markdown files, which does not include this one. So I should only have those two there. So we've got all three showing. And again, this should render the exact same. It's just basically Markdown with some extra things on top. Now, the other thing you can do here is if you're mixing the two, you can do this kind of dynamic syntax where you have Markdown or MDX. Just note that you can't have a space between those. You just need a single comma, and then they should render just like that. So now I'm actually saying, hey, give me anything that's either Markdown or MDX and drop it in the page here. And again, because it's in the pages directory, it's automatically a route. So the index is just the /blog, and then all the rest of these are rendered exactly where you would expect. And notice that because the wrapper is being used for all these as well, it doesn't matter if it's MDX or if it's Markdown, it'll have that little link back to the blog page. Now let's look at some of the actual advantages of using MDX. So I'll come over here. And the first thing we do is we get access to all of these things directly inside of the Markdown if I need it. So for instance, I could come down here and I could just grab the front matter.title, and it will actually basically give me these as exports that I can use down below here. Front matter dot whatever the thing happens to be. So if I come back inside here, you'll notice it says hello world there, and that's because of this right here. So if I comment this out, that'll be gone. Show you, there we go. Now this can be helpful because you don't have to like include all this in your wrapper component like your layout and pass it like your author name and all this other kind of stuff. You can just basically take it directly from here and render it wherever you want to in the page. Now you could also do the same thing right here. You can just up top here say export const, and I'll say like custom prop or something like that. We'll just set this to like high. All right, so I can actually use this as well down here. Now I don't have to say front matter. In this case, I can just say custom prop, right? And then it inserts it right here. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be a string. You can actually have something much more custom and then show it anywhere on the page you like. So it's kind of like working with like the Astro front matter, but you can do it right here below it. And it does need to be below the actual properties here in the front matter. Those are some of the powers available in MDX files, but we can also actually use components, and that's what I want to show you in the next lesson. In this final lesson of the module, I want to talk about using components inside of MDX files. Now, this will apply whether or not you're using content collections or just routing it like we've been doing so far. So either way, this is really useful information if you plan to use MDX. So with that said, we've already added the MDX plugin. Let's now create a component that we can import over here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the sidebar. We'll come over here to our components. Let's just create a very basic component, and this will give us a chance to practice as well, right? So let's call this just like link.astro. And if I close down the sidebar, we can keep this very simple, but I'll have a link. And for here, we'll have an href, and we'll just have an href prop that we pass in. So up top here, let's go ahead and destructure a couple things. We're going to grab the href that we want to pass in, and then we'll spread in a rest operator as well. We'll get both of these from astro.props. Now, all we have to do is also spread in this rest operator. This allows us to do things you might remember, like add an ID or anything else that might be connected to this anchor tag. Now, inside here is where we actually want the text for the link, or it could be an image and a text, like an icon and a text as well. So let's just have a slot in here, and anywhere we use this, we can just add a slot directly here. All right, so very basic component. We've done this before. Now what I want to do is import this. Now up top here, these are the properties connected to the Markdown. So if I want to do anything else, I have to do it actually below that. So down here, I can just import a relative path here, and we can call this link from, we'll go up again, components, and then finally link.astro. So let's save it, and I'm going to move over this direction, and we'll go to this first post, which is the one we have right here. All right, so we haven't yet shown it here, so above high there, so it'll be right up here is where we're going to show this. So let's go ahead and use the link like this. We've got an href that we can pass in, and let's say we point this back to the blog. And we'll go ahead and close out that link tag as well. And for the text, just to make sure it's clear, let's do like back, like that. All right, there we go. So now you see it's actually being used, an actual link component from Astro directly in here. Now, you don't just have to use Astro components. You can also use things like React. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Now, I don't have React installed on this project yet, so as a reminder, anytime you're going to use one of these official integrations, you can come over here and just do MDX, Astro add, and then whatever happens to be, in this case, React. And I'll hit install so it can install all those dependencies. And yes, that will work. And yes, update my TS config. Back up and running with npm run dev, and come on, how about that CLI? All right, so let's go ahead and open up the sidebar, and inside these components, let's create another component. And I am using TypeScript very lightly here, so I'll use it here, although I don't think we're going to actually end up typing anything just because I want to keep this short. So we've gotten a button.tsx file, and here let's just go ahead and scaffold out a basic button component. So I'm just returning this button component. In this case, this needs to be the type of button. And then in React, you can't do a slot, but what you can do is do children like this. So these will be the children that we get down here. So let's accept these as props. So I'll receive these children and then render them here. Their children themselves will just probably be text, but again, it could be like text in an icon as well. Now, just like with Astro, you can actually spread in a REST operator as well. So I'll grab the REST right here, and then we can just add that right here as well. And then finally, maybe I have like an on-click handler. And here, let's just say whenever this button is clicked, let's throw up an alert that just says clicked. Now, you can't actually pass in this right here, this function right here, from within an MDX file, at least not to my knowledge. So these components can't be quite as custom as you might be expecting. If you can do that, and I just don't remember that, I'll make sure to update the video once I figure that out. But you can also let me know as well. So we've got our button component. Let me come back over this way. We're just going to copy this down. I'll change this over to button, and then this can just be button right here. All right, now what I can do is have my button component. So that's the front tag, and let's go ahead and close out the back tag, and we'll say like a button. All right, so now if I save it, you see a button there. Now it looks like I can click on it, but nothing is working. Can you think of why that might be? If you've looked at the other times where I've shown you how to import other UI libraries, there's an extra directive we need to add, right? So just like in Astro files, I have to actually give this a client directive. So I can say client only, for instance, and then pass it React, and that will render both the text and all the working like JavaScript behind the scenes using React. Or I can say client load, and it will load all of the HTML or render all the HTML using Astro, and then load the JavaScript as soon as the page loads. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if I come over here, this should be operational, right? It says clicked. All right, perfect. So here's an actual UI component actually rendered on an MDX page, not something you can do in Markdown. Now, one other thing to mention about MDX files is you can actually pass along components to them. So if I come over here, this will be in the documentation I linked below. You can see that you can actually have custom components with imported MDX. So I can actually pass in here a components property and then send it some components as well. So I'll let you figure that out on your own, but a final thing I actually wanted to show you is that if you want to, you can actually override some of the default styling with custom components when it comes to MDX. So back up top here, let's see, right here, assigning custom components to HTML elements. So when using MDX, you can actually override things. So for instance, here's a block quote, and you'll see that what they're doing is they're rendering the block quote using their block quote. So they're reassigning their component here to the default of block quote. All right, so same kind of thing, you can pass in components. You can also write your custom ones that override or just add to what's already there. So let's go ahead and do that just to kind of give you that example, and hopefully you can extract that out to passing them down as well. So if I come over here, we can add another one. Let's just call it blockquote.astro. And here, once again, this will be an actual block quote itself. We'll have a slot inside here. And maybe you want to have something else here, like maybe you have a paragraph tag that has like that little thing there, all right, or whatever you want to do. All right, so there you go. You basically see that we're going to add a slot here, and this will override whatever the default block is over here. So let's say I came over here, and normally I'd have something like block quotes are awesome or something. So if I did that and I save it over here, you see I get this kind of custom styling. And I don't have the actual like quotation mark here because that's not part of it. However, I can override how it renders this by importing my own up here. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and come in here, and I'll grab both of these and change this to block quote. And now that I've imported it, I can export a constant. All right, same thing as if you were to pass in a constant here, where I reassign block quote, the actual tag in HTML, to my custom component here. Now, if I save it and come back over here, you'll notice I actually get this rendered right here. So it's actually using my custom component to render the block quote itself, the HTML tag of block quote. So you can see how powerful MDX is because it feels very much like Markdown, and you can do pretty much all the same things you do with Markdown here as well in MDX. However, you get some additional things like being able to use components or export constants or declare like kind of locally scoped constants here to use throughout your project. Now, Markdown and MDX are very helpful, but they pale in comparison to Astro's shining feature, in my opinion, which is Astro's content collections. And that's what the entire next module is about.